FileMaker 2012 conference, and this is one of our pre-practice sessions, so we get all dialed in and ready to go for the conference itself. And we always make a habit of recording these sessions, so this will be the third year, I believe, in a row, third or fourth year that we have the actual session recorded so people can see it after the fact. My name is Richard Carlton. I'm the CEO of RC Consulting. It's a consultancy in California and the western part of the US, but we're kind of all over the place. We've been 23 years of doing FileMaker, and we've been doing it ever since FileMaker 2. And of course, with the release of 12 and the improvements to Go, well, even supporting of a mobile platform in the first place a couple years ago, and then the improvement since then, it's been very exciting. We're seeing the product go places it's never been able to go before, and we're happy to be part of that. Helping me today are our illustrious compadres and partners in crime here. These are the same folks we had at DevCon last year. This is Garrett Debsky, who's one of our senior staff. Garrett is now engaged, but he still has his motorcycle. Being the fact he's engaged, he gets to keep his motorcycle. Once he's married, we're afraid that he will have to turn his motorcycle in for a station wagon. Miles, on the other hand, is still single, and he still plays piano. So if you hear the pianos playing in Florida through the halls of the hotel, there's a good chance Mr. Debsky is working off some stress by banging on the ivories. So, a little bit of housekeeping on the front side of this whole deal, and that is that this session actually is a very long session. It covers a great deal of content, and doing it in 75 minutes is not a reality. To cover this content in a real and meaningful way, you'd need a number of hours to do it. There are a number of hours of additional video and sample files that we've loaded on our website here at rcconsulting.com/downloads. This is also where you'd find the 2011 video presentation and sample files and the 2010 video presentation and sample files. In fact, actually, just as a quick side note, the 2010 session actually covers user interface issues for FileMaker Go on the iPhone and iPad. And there's still a lot of relevant conversation within that session that I recommend people seeing. Last year's session on synchronization is still valid. However, there are some additional third-party tools, and the third-party tools have gotten better for synchronization. So while that is useful, the initial session that we did in 2010 on Go, I still consider almost mandatory reading for a lot of our, mandatory viewing for a lot of our developers, even within RCC. So we have our video here. We have additional videos that go into great detail on some of the technology. We also want to point out that the FM Notify app, which is a free app on the Apple iOS App Store, is available, and we're going to be talking about that today as well. Now, we're going to send the latest slides to FileMaker, so you'll be able to download those from them. However, all the additional content, which is actually probably close to 1 gigabyte in content, will be posted on our server for download as you need to see it. So the goals of this session today are primarily going to revolve around the deployment of FileMaker Go farther and faster than what it can do by itself. The base product has a fixed set of features that it supports, and we want to take FileMaker Go and push it farther. That's a common skill set that developers and consultants need to have, is the ability to take the base product and do more with it, because your customers don't care what the base features are. They want to be able to take it further and farther and have it integrate with more things. So expectations. FileMaker Inc. has designated this session as an advanced session. They said, Richard, we want this to be an advanced session. We know that you've done intermediate sessions in years prior. We want this to be an advanced session. So understand that I am targeting this session towards experienced developers who have a complete understanding of the FileMaker product line, including Pro and Server and Go, what it can do currently. Additionally, most expert advanced developers have some additional development skills, such as programming PHP or CSS or other things like that, maybe Python. Advanced developers are going to have skill sets in these other capabilities. Maybe not everything, of course, but they'll have more than the base scripting skill set that's in FileMaker. So one thing to keep in mind is that even though this session is designed for advanced developers, if you have less experience, I'll try to bring you along with us during the conversation. If you get stuck on something, feel free to ask. But if it's a question like, what is a field, or what is PHP, then really you're in a session that's over your skill set at this point. Maybe not in a year or 6 months, but certainly at this moment in time, it's going to be more than you can probably handle. Feel free to watch it, and I'll try to keep everyone coming along with us as we go. So 2 technologies that we're going to discuss during this session primarily are server-assisted script execution and also the URL protocol. The URL protocol has actually been out for a long time, and it allows 2 apps or two websites or two anything to actually cross-communicate by sending a string of text through a URL, like an http://. It's actually not just HTTP. It can be all sorts of things. And it's very useful for communicating between apps, especially on the iOS. So first off, we're going to run through a little bit with SASE. As advanced developers, you've used SASE before. You should know about SASE. If you don't know, then you need to round out your skill set by understanding this base part of the product, which is the ability for FileMaker Server to actually run scripts for you that you would normally run with FileMaker Pro or FileMaker Go. Why is this important? Because SASE can actually make use of plugins. And plugins are an important piece of technology that's actually not available in the iOS. Why is it not available in the iOS? The issue comes up with sandboxing. Sandboxing is the entire process in Unix where an application runs in its own memory space. It runs in its own processes, and as it saves and writes files, it gets limited access to only its directories. So for example, we have an app here. If that app wants to save a file into the directory over here, it's not permitted to do so. So all these apps that you have on the iOS cannot natively communicate with each other without some sort of assistance or some sort of help. It's great for security because if we decide that this app back here is malicious and somehow it got to the App Store and it starts doing bad things, it cannot negatively affect these other apps. It can crash itself, but beyond that, the rest of the device, the rest of the applications are protected. That's cool. The bad part is that if this app is important and we want to interact with it, say this app right here allows us to generate the winning lotto numbers for the next mega Powerball lottery in the United States. There's no way for FileMaker or another application in iOS to directly communicate with it unless it uses the URL protocol. So let's take a look at server-assisted script execution. And specifically, there's no other sessions at DevCon on this topic this year, but there are a couple noticeable improvements to the product that really should be reflected in this session specifically. First off, Terry Barwigan is a product manager for FileMaker Server, and this guy understands server. His motto in life is that FileMaker Server should be boring, and I totally agree. And one way to make it boring is to make sure it doesn't crash. And FileMaker 12 goes a long way towards improving the crash resistance of that server. In fact, thus far with my team this year, we've been unable to crash FileMaker 12 in the last 6 months. One of the keys to that is separating the processes that make up FileMaker Server. So SASE, which is the server's ability to run a FileMaker Pro script in the main core process where FileMaker would actually host the database and manage all the clients. However, in FileMaker Pro 12, they took this process to run FileMaker Pro scripts and they extracted it out and stuck it in its own separate process in its own separate memory space. And this is really important because what ended up happening in FileMaker 10 and 11 is that if SASE started running a complex script and something unusual happened, which might slow down the server or actually crash it, this process was running inside the core database services. What you would have is a situation where the FileMaker server, which could be on a production server with 100 users accessing it, could go unresponsive. So one of the keys to this is to extract out all the various processes away from the core server. That way, in case any of the processes fail, it doesn't negatively affect the core server. We actually have had this happen in FileMaker 11, where SASE gets busy, it hangs, and it caused the whole server to kind of go sideways on us and quit being responsive. And then the customers who are using the database can't run a process or it doesn't work at all, and they call it to complain. And I hate it when the phone rings from a customer and they're complaining. So FileMaker 12 brings that process out. If it goes sideways, we can kill this process, and the core of the system remains functional and operational, allowing us to restart the server at a later time, maybe in the middle of the night, when no one will notice that the server went down for 10 or 15 minutes. So the whole idea is that all these processes here are extracted, and they're all listed here. In fact, actually, there's a great white paper by Stephen Blackwell and Wim DeCourt. They go through all the processes. These are the MAC processes here. In this case, we have FM SASE-D, which is a process for SASE. And you can see it's got its own memory space, its own process. We can actually go in here and kill it if we want. On the Windows side, we have almost the same sort of names. In this case, SASE is right here with a slightly different name. But you can also see the other core services that have all been separated. Now some of these were separated in 11, but there's been more isolation and protection of the processes with the introduction of FileMaker 12 Server. So we have the core server service that hangs out right here, web publishing engine, server admin, all sorts of additional technologies that live down here. But specifically we care about right here, SASE. So if this goes sideways, this core service will continue to host our customers and keep everyone running. So, FileMaker Go, no plugins. Why are there no plugins? Because third-party applications cannot live within the same memory space. They cannot directly communicate with each other. And that's a function of Unix, and it's a function of the supported technology with the iOS. What's interesting is that SASE, because essentially it's a copy of FileMaker Pro, a headless version of FileMaker Pro that lives in a separate process on your FileMaker server, it can still use plugins because it's operating under the Windows OS or the Mac OS, and it's not restricted to sandboxing that goes on with the iOS. So it still has access to third-party plugins. So we can actually take FileMaker Server and have it run a script for us that has hooks into the plugin. Now let's go through a real-world case. And specifically in this situation, I'm not going to go through lines and lines of code because it would take us hours to go through it in a meaningful way. But I want to show you SASE, and for advanced developers, they've seen this before. But this is a unique situation, a little bit deeper situation, and it solves some other business processes that I want to show you about, okay? So about the time you think this is very simple and straightforward, I'm going to show you something you probably haven't seen before. So Napa Balloons is a hot air balloon flight operation that runs out of the wine country near Napa, California. They have a whole bunch of FAA certified pilots. They have all sorts of balloons on a various weekday or weekends especially. They'll fill up these balloons, load it full of passengers, and fly around for a relaxing flight. Unless you're afraid of heights, and then it's not so relaxing. So the Napa Balloons folks wanted a FileMaker system that was hosted, and they wanted to take reservations, which also means they had to interact with credit cards. They didn't want to deal with PCI compliance because storing credit cards requires PCI compliance, and this is not a PCI compliance session. Just suffice to say that if you're an advanced developer, you've heard of this, and you know that dealing with it can be kind of easy or very painful depending upon the complexity of your business operation. But Napa Balloons wanted to get away from this and stay away from it the best they could, and so they were willing to pay us up front to simplify their lives. So to get away from PCI compliance with FileMaker is to ensure that FileMaker doesn't store the credit cards anywhere within the system, and really it doesn't touch the credit card information. To solve this problem, we wanted to leverage Authorize.net. Now most people think of Authorize.net as this magic black box, a company that you submit the credit card information to in a dollar amount and the money magically shows up in your piggy bank. And Authorize.net does do that. But they actually have a lot of additional services. And one of the additional services is their CIM, or Contact Information Manager. The whole idea with this system is that we're going to load our contact information in here and our credit card information directly into Authorize.net. So Authorize.net holds the credit card information for us. We never actually hold it in FileMaker. To communicate with Authorize.net, we're going to use a plugin from Beeswax, which is a web services plugin, which allows us to craft and form XML to communicate back and forth with Authorize.net. So let's go through the workflow for this situation briefly so everyone understands what's happening. First off, the customer goes to the web browser and decides they want to take a flight on a balloon, and they want to reserve the flight by providing their credit card information. Now we're not going to charge you credit card information up front. If we did, we wouldn't worry about this. We need to hold the credit card until they take the flight because they do have an opportunity to cancel prior to the actual date of the flight. The customer information we want stored in FileMaker so we can manage the reservations in terms of schedules and pilots and balloons and locations, things like that. But we want to store the credit card information on Authorize.net and not in FileMaker. So we have a website here. This is the Napa Balloons website. I'm not going to go through this in real time because we don't have the time in the session to do that. But I want to show you they can reserve spots on an aircraft here on a specific date with their information. This information is submitted into FileMaker through PHP in the web publishing engine. Next, there's a follow-on screen which contains the credit card information, including expiration, all right here. It includes some legal boilerplate about the fact that they promise to pay if they don't show up. Next payment. This is the FileMaker system here, contains all the information. We know that their billing status is that they're reserved. but we haven't charged their credit card yet. If we log on to Authorize.net system, we can see that Authorize.net has stored the contact information here and the corresponding credit card information here. We also see that Authorize.net has assigned a customer profile ID. Now we get to set our own ID here, but Authorize.net sets their own serial number right here. Now we store this information in FileMaker as well, so we can communicate with Authorize.net. We don't tell Authorize.net to run John Doe's credit card or Bob Smith's. We tell them to run customer profile ID number here for a certain dollar amount. That way it's a unique ID and there's no chance of miscommunication. So the workflow continues. The passengers arrive at the balloon departure site. The pilots are using iPads and they're checking people in. They have assistants that are also getting the balloon off the trucks. They get them out in the big green grassy field. You've seen the photos. And they're filling up the balloon, hot air, and the balloon starts filling up. Meanwhile, people are showing up and checking in. And this is where it gets slightly interesting. The passengers show up with their credit card and their photo ID, and the pilots will take their credit card and photo ID and swipe it through a mobile terminal. It could be the iPad or it could be some other process. Now the question is, why do they do this in the first place when they already had the credit card on the server with Authorize.net? And this is one of those little business moments that catches up with you as a developer and a consultant. If you take a credit card over the phone or over the internet and you actually never see the credit card companies consider that a more risky transaction. They charge a higher percentage fee to the merchant for processing that transaction. So maybe it's 4, 5, 6% on the transaction. If you actually run the credit card in person with a photo ID, the chances of fraud are a lot lower. As a result, there's a lower fee charged to the merchant. The Napa balloon folks running 20 or 30 balloons on a weekend with all these people running these credit cards can save several $100s in a single day by manually running the credit cards and not running them online through Authorize.net. Remember, Authorize.net never saw the credit card, never saw the photo ID. They don't know that it's really legitimate. They think it is, but what if the credit card was stolen? So there's a risk assessment that goes into that. That risk assessment turns into dollars for our merchant. So while these credit cards are being run, the pilots will also notate in their FileMaker Go database, which is being hosted, that certain people are no-shows. So if the person did not cancel in advance and they don't show, they still owe for the flight. But we don't have their credit card, we don't have their photo ID, and that's where Authorize.net comes in. So SASE, once a day, goes in, it finds all the riders that are marked as no-shows, and then it uses the plugin from Beeswax and a big long string of XML to communicate to Authorize.net, the CIM, to process this person's credit card for this dollar amount. We say, go Authorize.net, run the money, put in our bank because these people legally owe us the money. We don't have the credit card. Authorize.net has the credit card, but you go ahead and do it for us. Here's the customer's profile ID, run it for $299, and give us back the transaction number. So real basic, we've all seen this before as a developer. This is the UAC or the administrative console for FileMaker Server. We have backups that are scheduled here. We have our SASE script that's scheduled here in the same area. And down here, we can see that we have the actual schedule set up to run. It's running the Napa balloon file, it's running the script, it's got a username password assigned to it. And up here, I've taken a screenshot to show you the code that's going on. Once again, if we want to tear this down line by line, it's going to take a while, not something we're going to do in this session. But to summarize, we have a loop here, and in this loop, we're going to go through every person who was a no-show. We found that was no-show, we pre-established who they are, the fact that they do owe us money. We set some variables here about transaction and profile, and then we pass through an external function, FMNX, which is our external function call for the web services plugin. We loop through everyone who owes us, and we send to Authorize.net, please transact the information and give us back the successful transaction number. If we log back into Authorize.net, we can see that certain transactions, in this case, were voided. We have one that settled successfully. We also have associated transaction IDs, so we know what transpired. So all this happens without FileMaker actually holding or controlling the credit card information, which helps us with our PCI compliance. We basically get to say, we don't have it, we never did. If you want to audit the website, feel free to knock yourself out, but in terms of us having the credit card in FileMaker Pro and you needed auditing that system, not necessary. So questions from anyone in the audience about this process? So, URL protocol. Where does URL protocol become useful? Well, mostly when you want your iOS application to extract itself out of its sandbox. Now, this is our app. It's decided it wants the heck out of the sandbox, so away it goes. And we can use the URL protocol to help our app communicate with other processes or applications. So we have identified some useful areas you might want to think about. FileMaker to FileMaker, between two solutions. In fact, while I'm not going to show this, you can actually use URL protocol to talk between FileMaker Pro 11 to 12 and back again, or even FileMaker Go 11 and back to 12. So there's actually cross-version communication, which is generally not supported anywhere in the product line. You can actually do it here. I'm not going to show a demo on that, but just to point that out. So FileMaker to FileMaker here. FileMaker to another app on the same device. These are other third-party apps. We're actually going to show this in detail. We also could interact with a website. So FileMaker interacts with a website. Maybe it's a services website, some sort of online address validation or online service where you can look up information and bring it back to FileMaker. Very handy for that. Now this course is focusing on FileMaker Go because the iOS is sandboxing. But I want to point out that a lot of what we're looking at here will work on Windows and Mac. In fact, Windows supported the URL protocol all the way back in Windows 98. So it's been around for a long time. It's only really been supported recently with FileMaker because of this, once again, this need of the iOS in the sandbox. So a little bit of housekeeping here with the URL protocol, and that is the URL protocol has changed from 11 to 12. Now we can still talk between 11 and 12 if we want, but the protocol was FP7 or FP7 script. There were actually two URL protocols that were set up that worked on 11. Those have been consolidated together, and it actually intuitively makes more sense. So FileMaker 12 is just the FMP URL. So we see FMP7 or FMP7 script, and those are all just now FMP generically. So let's take a look at what is the URL protocol in detail. And this is a small string, so we're going to kind of zoom in here and look at it. So first off, this is the protocol that, if it's issued, will cause something to come back to FileMaker. Okay? This is not the protocol that will go out and talk to another application. This is what other applications are going to use to come back to talk to FileMaker. So first off, when you install FileMaker Pro or Go, it registers with the operating system the leading part of the URL right here. This could be FB for Facebook. I know on iOS there's support for FB, the FB protocol, the URL protocol for Facebook. In this case, we have FMP. And then this section right here, username and password. Now this is clear text. Now most of the time that users are using this, they're local on their iOS device. And so they're going to see this URL fly back and forth, and it's probably a password they should have access to. If the password is a concern here, you might want to think about how you want to restrict visibility to this. Additionally, if you actually shoot this URL through the web, like we're going to show an example here in a little bit, keep in mind that someone who's sniffing the internet and you're not encrypting the traffic, this security here is vulnerable. Okay? So up here is the address that we have, and let's go ahead and look at the options that we have besides the static address. We also have support for the tilde, which is just a symbol for us to indicate that the file is local on the device. So it actually locally resides in the flash memory of the iPhone or iPad. It's also important to note that this is a FileMaker Go supported function and not currently supported in FileMaker Pro. Another option is the $, which gives us the ability to access a file that is already open on FileMaker Go on the device. Now, I talked to FileMaker Engineering about this a couple days ago, trying to understand what the strategy was for this. And the strategy actually is that if a developer wants to access a database with a specific name, and he knows that the database is running on this person's device, he may or may not know whether the device is local on the device or it's hosted on a server. When I thought, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. Because most of the time when I access a database, I kind of know where it resides, or I know where it should be residing. But in this case, this is a wildcard that says hunt down the file that is already running on this iOS device, and we don't care if it's locally stored or hosted on a server. It's going to look for the next piece of the URL right here, which is the file name. All pretty straightforward here. Now we start getting to put the optional parameters from this point forward with the question mark. We have the script here. We get to call a single script at this point. We also get to pass a single parameter right here called param. In this case, we're actually passing the string top clients. Notice we don't put it in quotes, we just put it right in here like this. We also have the ability to pass variables. These are not global variables, but they're local variables. Now, we can actually pass quite a few variables. We could put variables with strings and strings and strings of data on them. And of course, it begs the question, how much of a URL can you build before it breaks? How long can the URL build? With a lot of the functionality in FileMaker, FileMaker will use the HTTP GET method, which has a fundamental default limit of 4,000 characters or so. And that gives you, a lot of characters to work with, but it's not an unlimited amount. You can overwhelm that, and I've done that before. However, with the URL protocol in the iOS, you actually get a tremendous number of characters. So I was talking to Todd Geis, who's one of my partners in crime. We get into trouble periodically. And Todd was telling me about his experiments where he was trying to break FileMaker. And Todd does spend some of his time pushing FileMaker to its limits. He's actually one of the sharpest guys I know. He's actually doing some sessions here at DevCon I highly recommend that you catch. And he had actually shoved 6 million characters through the URL protocol in the iOS, and he reported that it ran very quickly, almost with no performance degradation. And I was really surprised to hear that, because 6 million characters is a lot of text. And so, as a result, you have this huge fire hose with a lot of potential pushing data back and forth through the URL protocol on the iOS. It does help our apps get out of the sandbox. So let's talk about cross-application communication. This is where FileMaker Go on the device can issue a URL out that goes out to another app that performs a function. Now, in this case, when we install the supporting app, that app can be coded or programmed to actually reserve a URL with the operating system. Just like when we installed FileMaker Go, it reserved FMP with the operating system. So if the operating system saw that, it would direct that traffic to FileMaker. Well, examples here, of course, we've seen the CNS barcode. We actually saw that 2 years ago at the closing session of DevCon. FM Notify, which is an app we're going to show you here today, which is a notification engine that helps FileMaker Go. And of course, everyone's familiar with Facebook. If you do FB : and you have the Facebook application installed, you can actually interact with the Facebook application, just as an example. So FileMaker Go actually executes in a script the open URL command, and we stick a URL in here like this with the associated string that goes with it. How do you know what that string is? Well, you have to look at the documentation, the supporting helping documentation for these apps to find out what their approved URL string looks like or how it's constructed. So we issue the open URL command, and it goes out here. FileMaker Go will actually go to sleep here and await for the iOS to reawaken it in the future. Now, optionally, the supporting app can choose to call back FileMaker with an FMP URL. This is optional. One-way communication is the minimum of what we're talking about here. But for FileMaker to actually know that anything's successfully transacted, we really need a round trip where a callback URL is included. Callback is just a fancy way of saying our return communication, but it's all it is an FMP URL, totally the same as these, except just constructed a little differently. Once again, constructed per the programming specifications of the authors of the app. So let's talk about another scenario here, and that's where a third-party application on its own accord initiates a conversation with FileMaker Go. So in an example that we're going to show here momentarily, we have FM Notify, which is the ability for the operating system to show an alert, a notification on screen, and the user selects it, and that activates a script in FileMaker. It brings FileMaker Go to the front where it's awakened, and it causes FileMaker to initiate a script, potentially with variables. So here's our third-party app. It executes an FMP URL this time, because this is what iOS will see, and then it will take this block of string and hand it and shove it straight into FileMaker Go. And that is a one-way communication, again, typically, that's initiated for some reason from a third-party application. Now let's talk about a couple caveats about the URL protocol with FileMaker Go. First off, what's interesting to note is that if you have a user in FileMaker Go editing a field where they actually have the record locked, they're actually editing the data in a field so the record is locked, and they sleep the application, and then an FMP URL is called back, FileMaker Go will reawaken and restore that user right to the spot that they were. Now, during testing initially, we thought, well, maybe it'll revert the data back or it'll commit the data. It does neither one. It returns you right to the spot that you were. And then the script that you specified in the FMP URL will activate along with any parameters or variables that you've set. So of course at that time, if you have a script running, you could tell the script to revert the data or commit the data or whatever you want to do. That's one thing. The second thing actually here is more important. And this gets into how FileMaker Go runs scripts. FileMaker Go is running a script. And once again, I recommend users don't run really heavy-duty scripts like the sales report for the entire year, because that'll take your iOS application and it'll make it sit there and run and run and run and run and run. And these devices are not designed for running big, massive, long reports. They'll do it, but the performance of a pad or a phone is not the equivalent of a laptop or desktop computer. So if you start a script running on FileMaker Go, and you tell FileMaker Go to sleep, which is where you take a phone call, or for whatever reason you go to your Facebook app and you're doing something, you go to your email app, and FileMaker goes to the background, FileMaker Go will attempt to continue the script for 4 seconds to see if it can finish the script and then sleep. If it cannot complete the script in 4 seconds, it's going to sleep the entire application, and it'll make a note that it should pick up the script when it returns. If you issue an FMP URL under these conditions, what's going to happen is that the FMP URL will be seen by the OS, and FileMaker Go will reawaken and resume the script it was running previously. FileMaker Go at that point will entirely ignore the rest of the URL protocol that you passed it. The FMP URL under that situation will only serve to reawaken the app. The rest of that information is completely aborted and dropped. And you have no way of knowing that this has happened. The script and the parameters and the variables that were requested will not be queued for future activation. They are completely dropped. So it's important to note that if you're running big scripts and you sleep and then you have an FMP URL protocol that activates, there's a good chance that that FMP URL protocol will not activate properly. In fact, even if the URL protocol is activating a different file, it doesn't matter. FileMaker Go will reawaken. It'll realize, hey, I was in the middle of a script. It will blow out, it'll ignore your URL, and it'll just continue running as it was before running your annual sales report, which will take it the next 4 hours to complete. If your FMP file is not open and it calls a file to open, the startup script will run just as it would, and then it'll run the script with the options that you specified thereafter. So it's a lot like SASE. SASE does the same thing. If you tell SASE to open a file and to run a script from the server, it runs the open file, then it runs the actual file you requested. Now, one interesting thing that you can do with URL protocols, we talked about this briefly, and that's the idea of communicating between various versions of FileMaker, between say 11 and 12. But the idea is that with FileMaker, you have to define external data sources with an explicit URL. You have to have a domain, so-and-so-abc.com, or you have to have a static IP address. One of the things to keep in mind is external data sources in FileMaker 11 or 12 or any recent version of FileMaker have to be explicitly defined, which means that they have to be a specific domain, abc.com, for example, or a specific IP address for a server. But what if you have a situation where you don't really know the IP address of the server until down the road? And maybe it depends upon where the user is located. Maybe there's different servers with different services that are running around the globe and you have worldwide users. One of the things to keep in mind that you can use the FMP protocol programmatically to select an IP address from a list of addresses. Say that we have users in the West Coast, the East Coast, Europe, EMEA, or Asia, for example, and you build one app and you want to work everywhere and you want to talk to a FileMaker server that is closest to its location to minimize latency, because the lower latency on a network connection, the faster the performance of FileMaker, right? Well, you have to define 4 or 5 different data sources here and then try to build different layouts to work with different ones. And you have this one app with all these different levels and layers of complexity. Or you could have 4 different versions of your application. You have a West Coast version, an East Coast, and when someone downloads the file, they have to download the right one. And if they're on the West Coast and they download the East Coast, they have the wrong one. Or if they're on the West Coast and they fly to Europe, they got the wrong one. How about an app that self-configures itself because it knows where it's at? You run the get location function in Go to get your GPS location or your coordinates, and you know that you're kind of in what part of the world. And then you can programmatically say, well, the IP address in this part of the world for this server is this address. Well, you can't do that here. These are hard-coded. But with FMP URL protocol, you can do that. So this is something to put in your tool chest to think about in the future should you need a solution that does this. Other useful things to do with the URL protocol. Of course, we talked about this. We can talk to an external website. In the demo that we have, we're going to talk to an external website that's using PHP and JavaScript. It's easier to develop a demo using FileMaker than it was for us to set up PHP to Oracle. We don't have spare $100,000 Oracle servers laying around that we want to use, and so therefore it was much easier for us to do FileMaker here. But we have a demo for this you'll like. And of course, communicating with an external app on the same device, such as CNS barcode, FM Notify, Facebook, that type of stuff. So let's go ahead and dive into FM Notify. FM Notify is an application built by my engineers at RCC, which gives FileMaker, through the use of FMP URL, the ability to set up schedules and notifications on the iOS. iOS, down at its core, calls this capability Event Kit. This ability to set events or notifications on the iOS that are run and managed by the iOS itself. Now, FileMaker Go, in its current incarnation, does not support any notifications on the device. So the ability for FileMaker Go to tell the iOS to alert me that I need to do something in my database at 5 o'clock this evening or tomorrow at 3 o'clock does not exist. So we built FM Notify to use the URL protocol to allow FileMaker to set up these notifications. So before I get into a demo of FM Notify, I want to go through an actual conceptualization here, workflow, of how FM Notify works to create the schedule and how the schedule is actually activated and used by the user with the iOS notifications. So first off, we have FileMaker Go here with a database that we need to set up a schedule for. For whatever reason, we have a business process that needs a schedule set up. So we're going to press a button which is going to activate a script, and that script is actually going to execute an FM Notify URL. The iOS is going to see this URL and it's going to hand off focus and control to FM Notify. FM Notify reviews the information that you sent it, sees a date and time for a schedule and some other variables, and it sets a notification in the iOS right here. That notification is set and it will now be waiting for us. Then FM Notify hands control back to FileMaker Go with an FMP URL. We call this a callback to FileMaker Go, as we've effectively gone round robin. We started with FileMaker Go, probably with the same file, and we've come back to FileMaker Go, probably almost on the same spot. This process takes 1 second, 2 seconds at most. It's a very rapid process. The screen actually flickers a little bit because FileMaker Go actually is going to go to the background and then come forward. But effectively, it's a round robin process. And this is the schedule creation process right here. So now let's take a look at the actual callback process or the notification process and how that works. So the iOS is managing on its own accord that there is a schedule set up and it needs to activate that. Now keep in mind, this works completely independent of whether FM Notify is an active memory or FileMaker Go is an active memory. The screen could be at the desktop level, you could be in the middle of a phone call, it doesn't matter. iOS is managing on its own the complete notification process. So let's go ahead and take a look at the sequence for here. iOS sees that there's a notification that needs to be displayed. It's going to display it, and the user is going to select the notification. iOS hands off to FM Notify, which reviews the notification. It sees that it's supposed to call FileMaker, and it executes a FMP URL, once again, down to FileMaker to take the user to the spot that they need to go to with a script. I'm going to switch control over here to our demo machine. And I see my iPhone here, and I'm actually on the desktop of my iPhone, and I see the two applications that we've installed. That's the FM Notify app and the FileMaker Go app. Now, what's really important to note is that we set up FM Notify to be very easy for you to deploy to your users. For your users to use FM Notify, all they actually have to do is go to the App Store and download it and install it for free. There is no configuration and setup on FM Notify itself. This allows the developer to do all the setup and configuration within a script, within a database that they control within FM Go. No configuration is needed directly with FM Notify, which saves your users from that process. So let's go ahead and set up a demo here. Let's go ahead and drop in to FileMaker, and we can see a screen here. Now this screen is a database that I use as part of my weight management that I work on that allows me to track the food that I eat. Now, Jesse Barnum put me onto this years ago, and it's actually been reinforced with a number of classes I've taken, that one of the ways of trying to keep your weight under control for people who have a tendency to collect the pounds is to actually log all your food intake. And I have personal experience with all this. For those of you who've been around for a while, you know this to be true. So what I do is I log all my food intake within a FileMaker app. Now the problem was that the app would sit in my pocket and my phone, and I would forget to log food that I've eaten for lunch or for dinner. And then 2 or 3 days later, I go, oh, I'm supposed to log all this stuff. Of course, 3 days later, you don't remember exactly what you eat. And certain items that you might have snacked on when you shouldn't have been snacking get omitted. And then, of course, you think you've already only eaten so many calories for the day, when in reality, you've eaten a lot more. So that's the whole idea of the log. The log only works if you use it, and you use it every day. So if you wanted to set up a reminder to have the iOS remind me to log my food intake into FileMaker. So I'm going to go ahead and go here to a schedule setup. Now I've got a button here that's going to help preload the information I want. And we're going to set a notification for 2 minutes into the future. And we're going to go ahead and press the button down below. And this is going to execute the FM notify URL. It goes out to FM notify. In fact, it happened so fast that the reflection application here didn't actually fully see it. But it comes back with a callback to FileMaker Go. So in this situation that we sent FileMaker to a list view with a schedule on it, normally for your users, they just see a little pop-up dialog or something and say, hey, your schedule is set. We'll see you tomorrow or something, right? So let's go ahead and go out to the desktop. So we've gone back to the desktop of our iPhone. And we can see our apps here. We could be in the middle of a phone call or something like that. And what's going to happen here is that we're going to get an iOS notification. So here we see that FM Notify has actually sent us our notification at the top of the screen. If we don't reply to it or respond to it immediately, it rolls it back up into the notification system of the iOS. We can select down at the top and drag things down. We can see, of course, the typical stock picks and the weather and that type of stuff. But we also see our notifications that have rolled up. Now, of course, if you have 100 notifications from Facebook and Twitter and also your instant messaging, then you're going to be buried in notifications and you may miss your FileMaker notification, but it is here. By clicking on it, the iOS is going to hand off the FM Notify and then determine which URL it needs to activate and then shoot us back to FileMaker Go very rapidly. It happened much faster than I can even say. And so it takes me to a screen where I can log that I had some grilled chicken today. Grilled chicken was tasty. I had 800 calories worth of grilled chicken. That's actually a big pile of grilled chicken. And so that figures into my daily log. This is for me personally, but you can see business applications here. For example, the DevCon to Go solution would allow you to set a schedule for a session that you wanted to see that you didn't want to miss or forget about. So it could remind you today or tomorrow or whenever to go to a certain session and remind you to be there 5 minutes early. So let's go ahead and dive into FM Notify. I'm going to go to the desktop here on my iPhone, and I'm going to click on the FM Notify app, and I'm going to look at actually what's in FM Notify. And remember I said there's no configuration set up of FM Notify. Well, that's true. What there is in FM Notify is some screens which are effectively read-only screens, which give us feedback as to what our current schedules are set up as. So these are good diagnostic tools for the developer to use to review how their URLs were interpreted and set up inside FM Notify. So here at the top, we see the message that we're going to put up on screen. And down below, we see the actual URL that'll be activated at the time the user accepts the notification. You can see there it says FMP, and then we're looking for a database which is local on the device. And then the database is named OTC_daily_records.fmp12. We run a script, right? We also pass it a parameter. At the time we also set this up, we pass the date and time. The date and time that we want to activate is actually converted to seconds with a custom function on the FileMaker side that we have provided in our sample document. So it's pretty straightforward. You don't have to do the conversion. But it has to do with the fact that iOS is Unix and iOS uses the Unix timestamp. And down below, we actually see the full string of the URL that we passed to FM Notify initially, so we can see the complete block of text. Now remember that encoding is important, so don't put funky characters in here without encoding them, or you can use the encoding functions within FileMaker 12. We also down below have the create function that we're creating the calendar, and also whether this is going to be a repeating notification or a one-time notification. We also support 3 schedules within this application, and of course this is a early version of the app, but we support 3 schedules. In the future, we'd like to support an unlimited number of schedules, but of course that depends upon feedback we get from the development community if they find this to be valuable. If everyone finds this to be of no value whatsoever, then it will just leave it as is, and it'll contain 3 schedules. Down at the bottom, we can also see that we can view the pending schedules that are currently registered with the iOS. Now at this moment, you don't have any notifications that are scheduled with the iOS. We had one a moment ago. It was a non-repeating notification. It was completed and done, and then the iOS cleared that out of its system. However, if we did have pending notifications, we would see notification ID numbers here in this field. Now, I'm not going to get super deep into FM Notify and how EventKit and all these sorts of interoperability issues run. We have several videos on our website under rcconsulting.com/downloads.html. And that is where you can download a number of additional support videos where we take this all apart. But to suffice it to say that the iOS does have its own ID number scheme that it uses for setting up schedules. It does it on its own. And as you set a notification up, iOS is going to come back to you with an ID number of the notification that you've set up. It sets those notification ID numbers up itself. We don't directly control that. So once again, briefly, we've got the creation process here, where we set FM Notify. FM Notify sets the iOS as appropriate and then returns with a callback back down to FileMaker with an FMP URL. We also have the notification system right here, which is a process where the iOS realizes that a notification has been selected by a user. It checks with FM Notify to determine which of the 3 schedules it actually needs to activate, and then it calls the appropriate FMP URL to activate FileMaker Go. So I was talking to Todd Geist about this URL protocol, and of course we discussed how we tried to break it. We had 6 million characters in this conversation. And one of the issues that came up was that Todd is very transactionally oriented, as a good developer should be. In fact, Todd's obsessed about transactional integrity. He speaks on at DevCon, he has previously. It's a big issue. And transactional integrity is, of course, the concept that if you're going to execute something, either it executes all the way through and you absolutely know that it completed successfully, or it didn't transact all the way through, it didn't complete successfully, and you roll it back to the condition it was previously. You do not have a situation where it's partially baked. And worse off, not only is it not partially baked, you know the exact condition. If it completed fully, you know it. If it didn't complete, you know it. And if it's partially baked, then you know about that too, and you can kill it and roll it back. The whole idea is that we don't leave the database in an unknown condition. The question was with URL protocol is, what do you think about that from a transactional standpoint? And here's the issue, is that as soon as FileMaker calls a URL, or any app calls a URL, it hands that URL off to the operating system, whether it's Mac or Windows or iOS, and the app that called it loses view of what actually happens with that URL. So in FileMaker, if you want to confirm that a transaction actually occurs correctly, you need to execute the initial URL call out to the destination, and then make sure that you get a callback that comes back to FileMaker to a script that you use to confirm the fact that the system actually completed properly and that you do actually have transactional integrity. We talked earlier before about the conditions in which FileMaker Go would ignore the URL and continue a script that maybe it's already running, in which case you would know that something didn't complete properly, right? Because the initial launch script executed, but the system knows that no return script was actually executed properly. So that process cannot be confirmed or relied upon. You need to send it out and get it back, and then you know that something actually went round robin successfully. Next slide. Q&A. If anyone has any questions. No questions? We have a very quiet audience today. So, additional demo that we wanted to show was our single developer dating site. So we're at Florida, we're in Miami, we're having a great time, and we got a lot of single FileMaker developers, and so we figured we'd try to do our civic duty to help you folks find dates, right? And of course, I did have a chat with the folks at the Dental Hygienist Convention, and they offered to provide data of their members that are single for us, so we can use that information to help FileMaker developers get dates. We built a solution where we have a local copy of FileMaker talking to a hosted copy of FileMaker. And while the demo is somewhat arbitrary, it actually demonstrates the ability for us to send traffic out and back between two FileMaker files, even if they're not stored on the same device. As long as the same device can access both, we can communicate between them. So let's go ahead and switch over to my demo machine. And here we see a local FileMaker Go file running on our iPad. At the top, we actually have the application. This is Garrett. Now, if Garrett's fiance knew that he was in here looking for a match, Garrett would be in big trouble. But hopefully she's not here at DevCon and she won't see this video. So we're going to specify, Garrett changed his name to another one of my engineers, Steve Allen. Aha, so he's trying to cover himself by using a fake name. Got it. All right, so we have Garrett's gender, we have his dating selection here, we got the his color here, his favorite color, and any other parameters that we like. We press this button right here. We can actually see that Garrett has success. We went out to another FileMaker file, we did a search with this script, and we bring it back to the local FileMaker database. Aha! Jenny Smith apparently is a dental hygienist, and she is single, and she is looking for a date with a skilled FileMaker professional. So now Garrett's got a date. Now, this is once again an arbitrary application. We have a local FileMaker file here. We have a repository up on the hosted database server, and we can actually briefly look at the URLs that we're using to execute from one side to the next. So we're going to go ahead and switch back to our slideshow here, and I'm going to take a look at an enlarged version of the two URLs that we're calling. So we're in FileMaker 12. We're calling another FileMaker 12 file, and so we're running this on the iPad. Now this address is a local FileMaker server that we set up for demonstration purposes because we're taking our own FileMaker server with us to Florida for DevCon. So this would normally be more of a real static address. For those of you network folks out there, you'll recognize this as being a semi-dynamic address. But what we have is a URL here. It trips it, telling it it's FileMaker on the device. Once again, it works on Mac, Windows, or iOS. In this case, the script automatically formulated that Garrett was actually looking for a female, FMP12, but we also have a separate file, which is the male.fmp12. So if we have any single FileMaker ladies out here, and you're looking for a man, or whatever you're looking for, it's all covered right here. We can actually programmatically set which database we're looking for. We didn't have to do it that way. In fact, it's probably not even good database design. But the whole idea was that we can programmatically change any of the parameters in the URL just because we want to. We're not forced to do anything. We can set different files, different servers. It's very flexible. So of course, we can run a script right here. We can pass a parameter. That was his favorite color. We also have an ID number here for Garrett. And more specifically, we can pass a variable, which is the return URL that we want to execute. So we've gone out to the hosted database to find a match. And then this is the URL that we want to return on the way back. Now that actual URL, we kind of chopped it off here, but if you actually see the full URL on the return side, it's going to look something like this. It's going to say, here is the machine, the local machine that we're running, the IP of the iPad. And this could be actually the local tilde if we wanted to run it that way, or even a $sign because it's actually running on the device, right? And we specify that it's going to come back to the local FileMaker file called FileMaker match. It's going to run our script, it's going to pass an ID number, and it's also going to return the fact that the variable was female. So this allows us to see the initiation, outbound FMP URL, and effectively this is the callback URL that was executed. Along the way, on the outbound URL, we let the outbound FileMaker file or that outside supporting application know how to get a hold of us back, how to initiate the callback. It's like leaving a voicemail message on someone's voicemail. We say, oh, this is so-and-so, and you can call me back at this phone number. That's what this is. This is a voicemail message that says this is how you can get a hold of me back. Because even though these two files are running on the same iOS device, they don't intuitively know where the message came from. The iOS does not pass where it came from. It only passes the fact that it's going somewhere, it's going to FileMaker, it's going to this file, and that's what it does. This file doesn't know where this URL came from. It knows what it contains, but it doesn't know where it came from. So if you want to know where it came from, you have to include a return address on your envelope, right? So, FileMaker to website URL protocol. Once again, very straightforward. I talked to the folks at FileMaker, and they're like, oh, don't forget about the website, right? Jeff Benjamin. You know, because I was talking to him, he's like, well, I'd always rather build a website than try to build an app for the iOS that's going to, that you have to go through the Apple approval process. And of course, I understand that. Doing the Apple approval process for an app can always be challenging. We've done it a number of times, and almost invariably, things get kicked back when you least expect it, right? Next slide. Oh, we have demo. So we're going to go ahead and switch to our demo here. I have a FileMaker 12 file running in Pro here. We could run this in Go, but it runs in Pro, and so that's what we're going to be just for the moment. We want to interact with the web publishing engine on, actually it turns out to be the same server, but it doesn't matter. It could be anywhere on any IP address. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take two numbers. We're just simply going to multiply them together, and just to show that we're interacting, we're going to pass the numbers, we get the results back, etc., that type of thing. So what I can do is I have a button right here that says send to browser. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. It's going to execute an open URL, which pops the browser, and there's some PHP that runs, and it simply formats this text and does the math and displays it. And down below we have send to callback, which is a button that basically is going to execute an FMP URL. When it comes back, it's going to run a script and pass a parameter or a variable, which is going to allow us to set our 120 into a specific field. Now, there's a couple options here. That's where we would display an HTML page that could have a back end of anything. And then we have a button on that page that sends us back to FileMaker. Okay? Now, this is one of those moments where we talked about security earlier, where if you have an FMP URL and you actually go to set this from a browser, the actual URL came down to us from a web server, which means that the HTML behind this file, if you included a username and password, could have been sent as clear text. Now, if you're HTTPS and you have encryption turned on, then you're in pretty good shape. But if you send it as clear text, it could have been scraped by someone on the network. So go ahead and close this file. Let's run the next option down, which is the simple callback. Now, as you can see on screen here, we have some description. The simple callback is not going to use any JavaScript, but rather it changes the location header, which redirects to the browser directly. This is set within the PHP. So I can go ahead and click this button, again, right here in the middle. And notice that the value came down here at the bottom. But if we look over at the window that we popped up, there's nothing displayed. So in this case, the browser got its own header information, but the header information that we cared about was actually directed back at a different location. In this case, it was directed back at an FMP URL. Now this gets into PHP a little bit, so if you folks are not familiar with PHP, just save this, bank this information for a different day when you start to learn that technology. So we're going to go ahead and run the last of the three examples that we have here. We're going to send the click to browser button, which is going to open our URL. Now this is very similar to the first demo that we ran up at the top, which was the display. We've got the value right here. But if we click over actually on the browser, this was almost exactly the same function. It displayed the information, but on the first demo, we saw a button. In this demo, we've used an iframe to redirect a browser back to an FMP URL, which the iOS sees and forwards back to FileMaker. In this case, once again, we passed along the value that we had, which is 10,035, and that is set with a script into that field. Go ahead and close back to the other browser. Now, of course, the question is going to come up, well, why can't we run this in a web viewer? Well, in FileMaker Pro, that's not such an issue. In FileMaker Go, it's more of an issue because web viewers can burn lots of memory, and FileMaker is very careful about how you use web viewers. Web viewers can only operate if they're actually the active object on a layout. Now, if you don't understand what I'm saying, then that's another research moment for you to take home. The short version is that while in FileMaker Pro you can have web viewers all over a layout, you can have web viewers all over a layout in Go, but FileMaker Go will actually only display an active web viewer, which has to be an active object, which means it has to be a named object, which also means that it has to have focus on the layout. The moment it no longer has focus, FileMaker Go will take a snapshot, like a screenshot of that web viewer, and display that screenshot in that web viewer space. Okay, we're going to go ahead and run this again, but instead of sending it through an open URL, we're going to set this into a web viewer. Go ahead and click that. It loads it, and once again, the iframe triggers. And and we send at FileMaker Go back the results of 1035. Now let's go ahead and clear that data if you would for me, and go ahead and clear the result. And let's go ahead and run the top one at the top. That's it. In this case, once again, we haven't directed people automatically, but we can press the button if the web viewer is allowed to be interactive. And you can see that we can manually execute the button, which will send the URL to FMP with the script, file name, and the associated parameters or variables as necessary. So that wraps up our DevCon session for 2012 about extending FileMaker Go. I know that there's a lot of little details here that you would like to see and know more about, and we've taken the time to shoot videos and to post them ready for you right now at rcconsulting.com/downloads. There's a number of videos on FM Notify, some of which are high altitude level videos, and others are much deeper. We also have associated PDF documentation that's relevant both to FM Notify and also EventKit, which is Apple's notification system, as well as various other documents that we referenced during this session. So we enjoyed having you here at DevCon 2012. You have a good year, and we'll see you next year.